Hey, everybody. Welcome to our panel talk, and thank you for joining us this morning, midday, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. We really appreciate you joining. We've got a great panel lined up today on becoming a head of people. But before we dive into it, just want to give a quick background on us and what this conversation is today. So we will try to keep this panel as conversational as possible, tap into Ashleigh, Noah, and Linda's combined experience and background, and just have a conversation about what it's like to kind of get into the roles that they're in. We'll be having discussions on the side as well, so feel free to use chat functionality. You see that in the bar on the side. There's a Q&A section. It's like a different tab there. We'll be answering questions towards the end. And feel free to raise your hands in that section as well. We'll be using that. And today's conversation is brought to you by Gather. I'm one of the co-founders of Gather. Gather, we're building a tool for people operations teams to build out programs across the employee experience. Right now, Slack-based teams are using us for all kinds of programs right now: onboarding, offboarding, work anniversary, birthday recognition. So if you're interested in that, check us out. We also have a great community here. Many of you are part of it, but if you go to our website, you can check out our full community where we have a weekly newsletter. We have a space for one-on-ones and small group discussions, as well as these monthly panel talks. We also have a great extensive library where we interview people ops folks on various programs they built and kind of chat about the world of people ops. And you can go to teamgather.co to find out more about any of those things. But without further ado, I'd love to kick it off. Today's topic, we're talking about becoming a head of people. This is our very first topic related to kind of career trajectories and the space of people operations. We know there's a lot of folks coming in from various backgrounds who are excited about becoming heads of the department someday. And we wanted to talk a little bit about that journey and what that actually looks like in practice. So today we have Linda Deeb, Noah Warder, and Ashleigh Otter here to chat a little bit about their own experiences. They come from different backgrounds, but are now sitting in this head of people, VP of people and operations roles across their companies. So I want to kick it off with you, Linda. We'll do quick introductions, and then we'll have everyone dive in a second to talk about their own story. So let's do that. Linda, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. Hey, everyone. Welcome. Very happy to be here. I'm Linda Deeb, VP of Talent and People at Finite. We are a Series B cybersecurity startup, originally based out of Ohio, but over the past year and a half, we switched the team to a fully distributed remote-first environment.
Awesome. Thanks, Linda. Great to have you. Ashleigh, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So hey, everyone. Thank you. Well, thank you, Alex, and the team at Gather for having us here. I'm Ashleigh. I'm the VP of People and Operations at Perlego. Perlego is on a mission to make education more accessible. That's our kind of big goal and ambition, but I guess more simply put, in terms of how our product works, we're simply like a Spotify for textbooks, subscription-based platform for academic material. We're based in London. We're just coming up to raising our Series B at the moment, so sitting at about 90 people today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashleigh, and thanks for being here. And Noah, can you round us out here?
For sure. Thanks, everybody. Super excited to chat with everyone here. My name is Noah Warder, head of people over here at Guusto. Our mission here is really trying to create better workplace cultures across all industries and organizations. And so the way we're doing that is we have an employee recognition platform and employee recognition rewards. And so really empowering HR professionals and people professionals like everyone here today to set up really great employee recognition programs to, really highlight the contributions our people make to our teams. And so we all know how tough it is to make sure that people join our companies. So we're trying to make it a little bit easier to keep them in those companies for everyone. Yeah, super excited to talk here. We're about at the 45, 50 headcount right now, and we're about 15 as of a year ago. So growing pretty quickly.
Awesome. Thanks, Noah, and thank you for joining us as well. So let's dive into it. Let's go same order. Would love to hear just quick recap of kind of your own career trajectories and how you ended up in the spot where you are today. Linda, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, totally. I think I might have a little bit of an unusual career path in that I am originally from Hungary, and I lived in Hungary up until 2017. So I started out my career as a junior recruiter, which was not what I intended and wanted to do out of college, because I have a psychology degree with a focus on clinical psychology, actually. And we had a semester when we had to do organizational psychology related basically work during the summer. And I ended up at this boutique agency that ever since then kind of grew out to be one of the most popular IT and sales and marketing or business recruiting agencies in Hungary. And I kind of fell in love with it. And two reasons, really, it's the networking aspect of it. And also I had a really good boss. And I did that for about a year and a half. And after that, I felt like I wanted to dip my toes into more of the full operation side of a business. I wanted to have a more holistic view of how a business operates, how things are being done. And I had the opportunity to join the Hungarian team of, it was called Gawker Media. And then anyone who's familiar with the different lawsuits and acquisitions that happened with that company, it was then called Gizmodo Media and then ended up being called Geo Media Group. But what was good about it is I was exposed to the entire organization, both the local team in Budapest, which was mostly based of engineers, software engineers, as well as I was exposed to the larger American team and everyone coming and going back and forth between New York and Budapest. So it was really a operations role. I was exposed to both the HR world. I was exposed to both the business world. I was exposed to really high level decisions because the organization was fairly flat in Budapest because it was not a huge team. It was like a 30-40 member team, as well as I was exposed to facilities management. And this really gave me a holistic view of how, businesses work and what are all the things that we should consider when we are building out a team and what makes people happy and what are they looking for, both in terms of not only, benefits and compensation and engagement, but also, what makes them more productive in a work environment, what is an office should look like. After that, I moved to the US and ended up at a startup called Entopology. Entopology is in the 3D printing world, basically developing a design software for 3D printing, and started out as kind of a, just like at any startup, a wearing 1,000 different hats kind of role, covering both some assistant duties as well as operations duties, planning out an office really, which was, at a 50 employee startup, you can imagine it based out of New York. It was kind of like this small, kind of lofty space, not really an official office. And so kind of reimagining that, as well as being the first person who thought of building out the processes, the policies, the internal softwares and platforms that we use to really make sure that people, first of all, have access to the right data, have access to the right benefits, their compensation, it is well tracked as well, both on the employee side as well as on the high level executive side. And just in general, what are all the things that we have to think about to scale a team? And so I ended up staying at Entopology for 4 years, building the team from 15 to just over 120 employees by the time I left, which was very recently, actually. 3.5 months ago, I joined Finite to help them do the same thing, basically. Joining a very rapidly growing startup and build out the internal processes and systems that really enable the team to scale and be productive, have that engagement, and just be successful in general. So I think in a nutshell, that's about it. And I think if one takeaway is in my my path is that you can get to this level even though you're an immigrant. Like obviously there was a lot of learning curve, and I had to do a lot of learning by myself. But I think I hope that at least that's a strong message that I can give to anyone on this call who might be on the same trajectory.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that and sharing that advice and motivation as well, Linda. Ashleigh, you wanna go next? Telling your story?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure, for sure. So I'm originally from Australia, but now living in London. But I guess my kind of role, like route into the head of people, was also a little bit, I guess, abnormal. And the fact that I've actually never worked in a people or talent role before I became the head of people, which maybe is a little bit unusual. But I guess I would describe my kind of career in like two parts. It was like pre-tech and then post-tech. The first 5 years of my career, I worked in event management and like sponsorship, like sports sponsorship, where I did like a lot of sponsorship for big sporting events like Australian Open tennis or the Grand Prix or those types of things, and like ran large scale events, which was super interesting. I think if I think back around like what I learned from those roles and how it's impacted what I do now, is I had a real focus on experience, obviously, in those events, and like pulling something together and understanding the experience end to end, which I think is something that comes in handy, especially with thinking about the candidate experience, the internal kind of experience in the workplace. So I think that's something that's super helpful and I use today. But I guess I did 5 years in events and sponsorship in Melbourne, working for kind of a big corporate company, and then got a bit itchy and wanted to kind of work in more of a fast moving organization, wanting to go into kind of a small environment where it was kind of learning whilst doing and getting wearing lots of different hats. And that's when I moved to London. I worked at a couple of different startups in kind of more generalist operational roles before moving to a company called Founders Factory, which is based here in the UK, which is like an investment firm and a kind of accelerator. And I was supporting across their portfolio of early stage startups. So startups from kind of pre-seed to Series A. And I was supporting about a portfolio of about 30 or 40 in kind of really a generalist operations role. Basically helping them with anything they needed to grow. So what I found really, really interesting was that all of them, their main problem was around people. How do I get the best people? How do I make sure that those people are in the right roles? How do I make sure that they're supported? How to, and so what I found really interesting was that no matter how complex the business was, whether it was like a cybersecurity tool or whether it was like just a food platform, all of their problems were around people, which I thought was really interesting. And so I more kind of fell into the role just by understanding that was one of the biggest pain points, especially in growing companies and early stage tech companies. Off the back of that, I actually tried to I did co-found a business called Chosen AI, which was a recruitment tech platform, which was helping recruiters try to find better talent. I tried to get off the ground. We think we did okay, but we ended up selling it to a recruitment firm in the end. And I joined a company called Perlego, which I am now. And when I joined, we were about 15, 20 people. And the remit that I got given by our CEO is basically help us scale, help us grow, and work out what that looks like after that. And again, what I found was most of the issues and challenges we were facing around growing was around people. And so I kind of had evolved into this kind of head of people role, where I now oversee our kind of people function, our talent function, and our kind of wider operations function. And that's kind of my kind of weird journey into the role of head of people.
Love it. And I feel like everyone has their own unique journey kind of into this role, which it's part of what we're diving into here. But I think those are actually two very similar paths, both Linda and Ashleigh. We see anecdotally people coming over from the talent space like Linda and Ashleigh. As odd as your path has been being a founder and operations and all that kind of stuff, I think we are seeing a lot more of that, of people coming over from early stage generalist operations, that kind of background, recognizing the importance of people at an early stage and being like, this is a space for me to really develop out a cool department here. So Noah, why don't you round it out before we dive into some deeper questions here?
For sure. Yeah, and I think like Linda and Ashleigh, I came into the people role kind of oddly. My background's actually in education. I have a degree in education. I was a teacher for a little bit. And lots of my management background actually comes out of the hospitality industry. So running restaurants, running people teams within restaurants, hiring, building schedules, all that kind of stuff. And if anyone here has ever worked in the hospitality industry, you know that you have to think on your toes a lot. You deal with a lot of different personalities, a lot of big feelings, and you have to keep your cool no matter what. And so that skill set, along with managing classrooms, really helped prepare me for a role in the people world, where you are managing people and you're managing lots of personalities and lots of big feelings sometimes, and having to approach those situations in a very cool, level-headed, but empathetic manner. And so those two experiences really helped me, as well as trying to found my own restaurant and having that kind of, learned a lot doing that. And then I joined an early stage startup that had just come out of YC, sort of as their people operations person, came in and really helped them build out, again, their whole people function. There wasn't much there, no recruitment, no operations, anything, and grew to be the director of operations at that organization, managing both their Canadian and US teams. So I started and built out our US team of sales and marketing down in San Francisco, and then kind of remotely across the United States, and then our Canadian team of engineering and customer success and product up here in Canada. Left that organization after we raised our Series A, and spent a little time trying to get product fit, but didn't quite work out. And then went on to found my own company with a couple of co-founders. It was called Battlesnake. It was an events company for developers to come together, sort of like esports development for developers. It's still going, but because of COVID, we got nailed really hard. We put on events for people and had 1,500 developers show up in a conference center. Didn't work so well during COVID, so took a step back from that, because again, like Ashleigh, did a lot of events management, so dealing with vendors, securing spaces, all that kind of stuff. And then joined Guusto just about a year ago to help them scale out their operations. So joining an HR tech company, knowing that, as an HR tech company, we almost have to be better than every other company out there, better than our clients when it comes to our own people practices. And so really taking a forward looking lens to how we develop our people practices. So always trying to see how we can be better, how we can be creative. We're bootstrapped, so we don't have that equity, that VC funding backing us. So we have to be really creative with how we attract and retain our people. And so a big part of that is, just how we build out our programs and make sure that people are always growing and doing what they can. And so, yeah, major journey, try to found a couple of companies. One's still going, Battlestake's still going. So it's really cool to see that one still operating sort of virtually, and it's growing, which is nice to see, and still advising with them and working with them whenever I can, but really excited on the path that we're at Guusto right now.
Love it. Thanks, Noah. And just now realizing 2 founders on the call as well. So founder into a people role. Very cool. Well, let's jump into it, and let's just start off with a really quick question. I think interesting looking across your titles. Linda, you're VP of Talent and People. Ashleigh, you're VP of People and Operations. Noah, you're head of people. Some other titles we see: Director of People or Director of Talent, Chief People Officer, VPs versus heads. I think working in startups, titles have meaning, but they're also, it's not like the same level as like an enterprise company where you're like, oh, I'm at this title, I'm at this title. What is relevant here for people kind of breaking into these roles? Like, what is good to know about the differences in some of these titles? I think something that pops into my mind is just like, there's some differences sometimes when titles have, talent, it has some recruitment built into it versus like people and operations might be more employee experience focused. But I'd love to get your quick thoughts on kind of titles. Feel free to jump in, anybody that wants to.
I'll quickly jump in. Is like I've held 2 different titles. I've been a director of operations, which was like, that was facility management, that was payroll, that was benefits, that was basically everything outside of sales, marketing, and engineering and product. Like, I touched everything. And so, but, negotiating new leases, hiring, employee experience, all that kind of stuff. As head of people, I'd actually say I'm actually a little bit more niche than director of operations, which is surprising, but because I don't deal with the payroll, I don't deal with any of that kind of stuff. I don't deal with facilities management. I am strictly employee and talent focused. And so there's a little bit difference there of just like really looking at our people and how to bring more people in. And that is the sole focus of my role right now, which I like better. I feel like I can really use my skills and my experience to make a little bit more change there, instead of like dealing with the admin stuff of like, I don't want to deal with a landlord. It takes a lot of time, and it's not really moving the needle forward on a lot of the things that I want to do. Very important, but not what I want to be dealing with.
Yeah, I personally really don't like titles, and maybe I'm a bit weird, but I really am like pushing for a world with no titles, because I just think you can call yourself anything, but it means something different at every company, right? Because also you could be the VP of people, but if there's no one underneath you, you're also people assistant, and you're also office manager, etc. You could be VP of people and you could have a team of 30 underneath you, right? So I think that titles don't necessarily mean that much. And if I was to give any advice, I would say don't get hung up on the title. I would really trying to start looking at what the role entails, and like what is the JD, or like speak to the founder and say like, what do you actually need, right? Like, and also try to understand their wider org structure, because for example, like I'm head of people in operations, but we don't have a head of talent, so I also oversee the talent function. But I know at other companies that's split, right? So I think it's really trying to understand the org structure that you're going into. What are already the roles that are in play? What are the skills in play? How would you complement that? What are they looking for this role to take over? Really, rather than trying to get hung up on the role title. I think at bigger companies, there is a difference between a chief people officer and a director of people. And that would be, I guess, around the remit, whether you're more kind of strategic kind of board level versus, maybe hands-on in the delivery. But I think in kind of companies at our stage, probably up to a couple hundred people, it's more around the wider org structure and how you fit into that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's interesting just talking to folks across the space and seeing who they report to is just like a very it's really all over the place. You get some people that are reporting directly to the CEO, some people to COO, and some people to even a lower level operations person. So that is super relevant when you're thinking about kind of where you sit across the organization. I've even seen some people departments. I've seen someone who IT tied into people, right? So they had 4 different departments under them as VP of people, and it's IT was one of them, internal operations, people and talent, right? And that's 30 people under them. So they're kind of to some degree acting in a COO type capacity as well. So I think that's always good to look at and understand. Linda, anything else to add there?
Yeah, I actually, I was in a similar role at Anthropology. I had talent, people, executive assistant, and IT reporting into me. So I can only repeat what Noah and Ashleigh said before. I think it's very important that anyone who is looking to kind of get to this level, first of all, don't focus on the title, because titles are not enough to really show what you've done and what your responsibilities would be. I think it's very important to, especially if you're interviewing, to dive into the, what is this job about? What does this job entail? Who all will be reporting into me? How am I going to be empowered to build out the team for myself to really support the entire company? What are the resources I will be able to buy to really be able to do the job that we need to do for this company? So I think I can only 100% agree. Don't get hung up on the title. Focus on the responsibilities and whether it really covers everything that you would want to deal with, and really get your experience in. And I think it's in any new role, what I like to think about is, does this role give me something new? Is this something that's still a stretch for me? Am I going to learn something? At least that's my personality. I always like to stretch myself, and I always like to look for something new in each role, sort of like a challenge, because that pushes me forward.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for sharing that. So I guess that's a great jumping off point for the next question of just what does the day-to-day look like for you? And I think especially with what are some unexpected things, what are some myths that people have about your roles and what they are that may or may not be true? Would love to just kind of hear you break down, what are some of the most important things you're doing, and what do people misunderstand about your roles that are not doing it day-to-day? Feel free, anybody who wants to jump in first.
I'll jump in. I think first off, being at a startup and being at the executive level, I think it can be easy to think that, oh, you're an executive level, it's probably just strategy and planning and looking forward. But in reality, there's a lot of work you actually do on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's actually one of the challenges, but it's a good one as long as anyone in this role at a startup is up to it, to be able to actually do that context switching, because it requires a completely different mindset. And I think it can be overwhelming at times, but at the same time, it's very rewarding. Like I really like that. But you need to prepare yourself that you will need to be able to both set the direction and the vision for the team working for you, as well as the company as a whole in terms of the culture. But also you have to be willing to jump in and do the work. And I think that's actually for any role, anyone who would want to be an executive or anyone who wants to become a manager, then director, then higher level. I think I like to think of leadership as being a servant leader. So not looking for that, oh, here's my next step in the career, but here's how I can empower the people working for me to do their best job. And I'm not here to micromanage them, but to have that humbleness that, hey, like, we are in this together, we are a team, and I also don't have all the answers. Like that, I think that's so necessary for any leadership role, to have that, ability to step back and say when I make a mistake or when I don't know something, because, we don't hold all the keys to all the doors, but you have to have that humbleness to be able to say that, so that that transparency creates that trust within the team that will actually drive to productivity.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point you made as well, just about kind of working in a startup in general. And a leadership role is like always part strategy, but then part doing stuff. You're like, somebody with my title is doing this, like, but that's just like part of the reality of working in companies at this stage. I think, across the board, and we see that a lot, especially if you're a 1 or 2 person people team, you're going to be on the ground doing some stuff for sure. Anybody else want to jump in?
I think another myth, if we're debunking myths, I think something that I hear sometimes is that, like, hey, you're the head of people, you must be responsible for everyone's happiness, or that you must be responsible for the culture of the company. I'm like, oh, really? Can one person be responsible for that for the whole company? I think that something that I kind of tried to kind of explain to the company and kind of work with my team on is that we're there, I really think, to help enable the business to grow and help enable our people to be the best that they can be. But a large part of that is to, as Linda was kind of saying, empowering the people around you to support others, rather than like being that person who solves the problem or makes people happy. So I think a large thing that we're working on at the moment is like really how we can support our managers and the wider team to support their teams to make them happy and engaged and enabled, rather than like it's the people team who are solving that for everyone, right? So I think it's, rather than trying to solve the problem, it's trying to build the structures around it to help the people solve the problem. I think would be one of the things that I'm trying to like myth bust at Perlego, at least.
Absolutely. Noah, do you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, I think like 100% what like Linda and Ashleigh both said is like, you need to get down on the ground and do the dirty work, but then set the strategy. And then a big part of it is also just like talking to your founders and your executives, because a lot of them, probably all of them, are going to turn to you often and ask you for your advice on how to do things. So I think like I want to touch on something that's not always talked about, is like, as a head of people, as the top people person, you are often the sounding board for the entire organization. And then you can't always go and and ask other people to be the sounding board. So it can be like, and talk about sort of like the challenge of like, it can be a very lonely position. And so finding that community of other people, professionals, is very important, because within your organization, sometimes you're very isolated in some ways, of like, everyone comes to you to ask for advice and to sort of unload their burden some days. So figuring out ways to create your own network and your own community to also talk to people and get advice and get help and talk about those things, because often you can't do that within your own organization, because you can't really go to your CEO and be like, I'm miserable right now, and I hear all the things that I hate about this company at this moment, because you just need to vent. But if you have a really good, strong support network, you can go do that with another people professional and just be like, hey, I just need 30 minutes to talk. So I think that's the other side of this role that can be, I think, a lot of people have their rose-colored glasses and are like, head of people, it's all glam and great, and I'm going to create this amazing organization and empower all these people to do all these amazing things. Yes, we get to do all that, but there's a lot of stress, and a lot of people look to you to sort of help them shoulder their burden. So having that other side of the role is also really important to talk about, I think.
Absolutely. And quick plug just for our community, we're setting up a lot of those one-on-one conversations with folks that might be the single person on their team and need someone to chat to about things. So I want to turn this discussion a little bit toward just advice on the space right now. A lot of things are changing across people and what this role looks like. We've seen really just these roles explode on the back half of this of the pandemic, especially in the startup world, where startups are getting more funding than ever. They're hiring more people. They're growing faster. A lot of people, organizations are falling apart right now. And I think leadership is really seeing the importance of building out a solid people team, thinking about things, I think, a little bit more proactively than they were, even 2 or 3 years ago. So I would love to get your perspective, just kind of, in these roles and with other peers. Kind of a two-part question here is like, how do you see this role developing over the next few years? And then for our folks on here that are either not in the people space yet or in their early stages, what skills should they be developing right now to prepare them for these roles in the future? And feel free, anybody that wants to get started.
I'll jump in. I think this role has changed immensely just over the past couple of years since COVID hit. I mean, head of people, head of HRs, all these people were all of a sudden expected to also be remote experts, to be DE&I experts, and to be all of these things that we weren't and probably still aren't. And so I think if you're looking to develop skills and you're looking for things that you should really be focusing on, if you want to become a really great head of people, I think realizing that you can't be an expert in everything, and understanding that you need to have some general knowledge of basically everything that sits under the people umbrella, and maybe being an expert in one thing, but knowing who to ask for, who ask for or ask how to get help in those other areas, or to advocate to hire in those areas if your executive team thinks they're important, and pushing for that, I think, is really important. And knowing when to say, I can't take on that piece because I don't have the bandwidth or I don't have the knowledge there to do it effectively. And if we want to do this well, then we need to hire somebody here. I think that's how it's going to change, is that the head of people is going to become less, I'd say less of what it is. And it's going to be split up into more specific expert roles, like head of talent, head of DE&I, head of employee engagement, head of whatever. It's just going to be split out a little bit more, and maybe there will still be a head of people that kind of sits on top of all those people, but there's going to be more expert roles, I think, coming out of this pandemic and how things have changed. And then skills that make a good head of people. I think the biggest things are being empathetic and humble, because you need to know when to say, I made a mistake, I don't know, we need to hire somebody for this. And then also being really empathetic of people's needs right now. I think those are really big things that every leader should really have, not just a head of people, but I think they're especially important in a head of people role, because you have to build trust within the organization in a very meaningful way.
Yeah, I think I definitely second that with what Noah said, in the fact that the role is evolving so quickly, and all of a sudden there's all these different things that we have to try to learn and do that we're trying to do for the first time. So I think whilst Noah's correct in that in the future, like, it might be split out. I think in the interim, especially when you're in small companies and you might not have the budget to hire those specialists, I think the best skills that you could have as a head of people, learning how to conduct great research. Really have to just be able to ask other companies what they're doing, look online, listen to podcasts, think about all these different things, how are other people doing it, and then also build a test and experimental mindset, literally how a product team works, right? What is the problem we're having right now? How can we test something really quickly, see how it works, iterate, and move on, right? Because what I always try to say to our business is okay, well, no one's ever been through this pandemic before. We don't know what it's like to remote work, but let's work it out as we go, right? So I think that's a really kind of key skill set for head of people as well as we evolve, is having that kind of research mindset, kind of constantly learning mindset, but then also more importantly, like test and experimental mindset, like really breaking that down into how product managers would do it. Like, let's A/B test something. Let's kind of like work in sprints. Let's like push something out with a small group of people in the business, rather than constantly trying to push these big things out to the whole company, which might be a little bit jarring. Let's try to work on like cohort by cohort basis.
I want to
go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I want to echo that I think it's so important. One of the biggest risks, I believe, in any people department or people organization is the mindset of, oh, we got this done, let's forget about it and never look back. And then let's say months later or years later, someone is asking the question that, hey, like, this seems odd, why are we doing this? And if the answer is, oh, we've always done it this way, that's not a good answer, especially with a startup, with a growing company where you continuously build on the team. You have to have this curiosity to ask, well, is there a different way? Could we do it differently? Is it time to reevaluate? I think it's so important to iterate on these things, on the processes, on the policies. It shouldn't be just say, hey, let's just write it down and forget about it kind of attitude.
Yeah, absolutely. Loving some of these things. I think all of you coming from kind of different backgrounds here, bringing concepts from other spaces into this is really interesting. And I think something that we've seen across the board happening, especially in people ops and startups, is like bringing over, best practices around product of iterating and, thinking of these things as, products that you're rolling out to your team, and thinking about best structures for how to build those over the time and continue to work on them. So that's really cool. And we are starting to get some questions rolling in, so I want to make sure we save space for that. I do have one more kind of big question on our agenda that I want to tackle. So I know I mentioned, a lot of startup leaders are coming in and saying, hey, we need better people operations. That's not the case across the board. In fact, you get a lot of leaders and founders who are in kind of different places about what this means. Some people just are in it for the talent. Some people really care about creating great organizations and great workplaces. What advice do you have for people that might be actually interviewing for these types of jobs to really figure out where their leaders, where their CEO stands on people, and know the kind of level and support they expect to get, and just kind of what you've seen across that?
Maybe I'll jump in. I don't know if I have like a really amazing structure for it, but I can just explain to you how I did it. I think in like a head of people role, I think you have to have a really amazing partnership with your founders or management team and CEO. So I think more than anything, it's getting to understand them on a human level before you join, trying to understand like how they view the world, what do they value, like how they make decisions, all that kind of stuff. Just kind of understand if you can have that relationship and bond with them. I think some things you could ask around like what they're going to, some questions you might be able to ask to tease out like how they view the people function is around like, do you see the people function having a seat at the table when decisions are made? Do you see have you made kind of decisions around the business that are putting people first? Can you give me a couple of those examples? Those types of questions, just because I think that there maybe is a trend at the moment that you need to have an amazing people function and people come first. And I think some founders know that they have to, but they maybe don't know that they're maybe not really truly prioritizing it. So try to ask those questions to really see if they're thinking about it in the right way, or ask them kind of what kind of articles that they've been reading recently around the space to see if actually they're interested in it, or they just want to outsource it and have you work on it, or they're actually going to be a partner with you. Could be some questions to ask.
Awesome. I think some great, very tactical tips there. Anyone else want to jump in?
I think also just as funny as it sounds, is looking at the ego of the CEO and the founders that you're talking to. Asking them about mistakes they've made since they've started the company. Have they owned up to those mistakes? How do they talk about transparency within the organization? Because you don't want to work for, you generally don't want to work for a couple of founders or an executive team where they're not going to admit when they are wrong, especially when it comes to the people function. They need to be able to hear you give them hard feedback. I think that's the big part of like, and asking them like, how do you take feedback? When was the last time somebody gave you big, like really hard feedback? How did you receive that? What did you do with that feedback? And then asking them, how do they give feedback? Because I think it's really telling with how somebody gives feedback is how they also get feedback. And then also just asking them about like, what's the #1 priority for the company right now? And just seeing how they answer that. And if it's really like revenue and revenue focused and then whatnot, it's like, maybe they're not going to be as focused on the people side of things if all they really care about is money. Money's very important, but if they answer it like, well, obviously revenue is really important to us because we have to, keep the company afloat, but we understand that to generate more revenue, we need to have a great people team, and that's why we're hiring for this role. So it's how they answer their questions and how they tie it back into your role that you're interviewing for. I think those are really important, is to really see how they tie back their mission, how they tie back their values, how they tie back their most important need back to the people role. Because if they're just like revenue, we just need to sell more, we need to do more, we need to do this, it's okay, are you gonna help like give me the budget and the space to make changes on the people side? Because sometimes those are expensive and you don't see the immediate gain from those, where someone who's solely revenue focused, they want to see that immediate impact.
I totally agree with that. And I think for me personally, one of the most important things is to talk about values. And I not only mean the company values, because most companies have some sort of values, but also their personal values. Like, how do they genuinely, individually, personally think about building out a team? How do they think about performance? What does good performance look like for them? And going back to what Noah said, how do they think about work? Is it really about pushing everyone till the last minute of the hour in the day and even beyond that, just to produce and get to the next level and maybe burn the team out? Or do they recognize that there has to be a work-life synergy? I like to use synergy instead of work-life balance, because I think work should fit into life and not the other way around. And so it's really important to have that kind of same or very similar mindset in how you approach the people function and how you approach building out a team. Because let's be honest, most startups and most CEOs start at a company without this function. So it's really important, and can be there are a lot of lessons to learn when you just ask them about how they started it and what they have learned through that path while they were doing it on their own. Like, really, how was it like? And what were their thoughts when they started out? And then compared to that, what would they do differently? And how will they empower you to do it differently? And I think this is the point where I would mention that it's so important that a role like this reports to the CEO, because you're not the only person responsible for culture. Culture is so much about the behavior that is being really shown on a day-to-day basis by the CEO and then the rest of the leadership team, because all the leaders have to be on board with you in modeling the behavior that you also expect from employees. Otherwise, nothing is going to work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Let's jump into questions now. So we've got about 12 minutes and 6 to 7 questions here. So let's see if we can get through all of them. Do some just quick hitter answers. And our top question with the most upvotes right now, I'll show it on the stage here. For Linda and Ashleigh, how did you find it joining a people role with no previous HR experience? Did you expand the HR team to support you with this function?
Yeah, I can jump in quite quickly. So I think it depends a little bit on the stage of business. So I think when I joined Perlego, we were about 15, 20 people. And I was, at that point, I was chief of staff. And so I was working across basically special projects, taking anything from 0 to 1 where we didn't have the team in place already. And so really, and then when we kind of got to the stage where we really started needing to kind of build out a really big or more structured people function, I have since hired specialists who sit within my team who I lean on a lot. So I've got an amazing talent lead who heads up kind of our talent recruitment process, and I've just hired a really amazing people partner who's come up kind of up more of a traditional kind of HR route, who's also amazing, who I lean on quite a lot. And now my role has evolved quite a lot in terms of supporting them and thinking more on how I can link what they're doing back to the business and so forth. So I think it depends, again, the stage of business that you're at and the people that you have around you. But I felt like for me, it's actually really been a positive because I've been able to view things through a slightly different lens, and I haven't really come with like a pre-considered notion of what good looks like. And I've been able to kind of look at lots of different companies, take inspiration, and then find what works for us rather than seeing something for one place and then applying a playbook.
Absolutely. Same here. I did not have, or we did not at the time have the resources to actually expand the team itself. So a lot of what happened with me is I relied on, obviously, like most startups have a outside counsel when you start building out a policy, and you should when you write a policy. So that was one side of it, but that's mostly obviously the legal background. But when it comes to the strategy and building out the programs, I 100% agree with Ashleigh that it's actually good to not have those preconceived notions, and also to keep in mind that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So much of this is being done on a day-to-day basis at other companies. So go out and look for those resources. There are a ton of open source stuff on the internet. There's also so many communities like Gathers as well, where you can just talk to other people, pick their brains, get their feedback, or just share a challenge with them, and they can provide their perspective. So that has been so crucial for me as I was starting out on this more of a generalist journey after my recruiting and then operations background, and really to have a systems thinking and this development mindset that, okay, we don't want to just set things in stone. Let's see what we can change over time, what we have to change over time, and what can we do better.
Awesome. Thanks for answering that. Along those lines, we have another question here about kind of coming in from a non-traditional background. How did you actually get these jobs? Did you reach out to the founders of the companies? Were they through your network? How did that happen? Maybe some just quick answers across the board here.
Yeah, just quickly, the job that I mentioned at the beginning, where I worked at Founders Factory, which was an accelerator and investment company, we had actually invested in Perlego when there were about 5 or 8 people, when they were like pre-seed. So I basically worked with them early on from like a outside consultant kind of advisor perspective. So yeah, I kind of knew Perlego through my network, and then from that, we had really similar ways of working. So the founder asked me to join.
For me, I applied for a job when I was after I moved to the US. So my job and role at Anthropology was a organic one that worked out very well. And so, I advanced a lot in my career at that company. And about my current role, I was approached by a recruiter.
Well, I joined Guusto. They were actually looking for an HR consultant when I started. So I reached out to them and started talking to them, and then quickly realized that they actually needed a full-time role and was like, you need to hire somebody full-time for this, and convinced them to hire me on full-time.
Love that. Awesome. Continuing to get through it here. Okay, how do you prioritize in a role that is so varied? That's a great question from Donna.
Well, you don't do it alone. I think it's so important to keep in mind that, again, you're not a silo, and you shouldn't be a siloed function. So it's important in general as well, not only for this question, but in general, to keep in mind that you should be aligned with the business objectives, and you should always find where can you provide the most value in a given quarter. And that can only happen if you really follow the business strategy. So both the talent and the people program strategy should follow the business strategy, because that's how you can really show to the rest of the organization how much value you actually bring as a team and as an organization. So never do it alone. And then, that objective should give you the priorities and the focus for any given month and any given quarter, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think another piece of that is getting the employee feedback of like using your pulse surveys, using your however you're collecting employee feedback on a regular basis, using that to also drive your priorities. Because if you're seeing a trend in, maybe your employees aren't seeing the recognition that they want, maybe they're not seeing the growth trajectories that they want to see, maybe your career ladders aren't as fully fleshed out as you want to see. And so looking towards your team and seeing what their priorities are, and then maybe adjusting your own priorities to see how you can best support them, because that is your company, is your team.
Yeah, so much of that product mindset there as well, of thinking of like serving the team. Very cool. Awesome. Another question from Alex. My role, Director of People Ops, is new. My CEO and I created it based on growing needs in this area. Any advice on how to introduce, inform our team on what to expect and how I can support them?
I've done this at every company that I've joined because I think, and we've talked about it here, is there's so many misconceptions as to what people operations is, what HR is, what it all is. And so I've actually done like presentations at an all hands meeting of just like, and I titled it as like, what do I actually do? What are the things that I'm focused on? What are the things that I'm helping with? What are the projects that I work on? Because so often people can be a black box. No matter how transparent you make it, people just don't think to look at your projects and what you're doing. And they only hear you talk about it maybe once a week or once a month, depending on if you're on all hands. And then sitting down with as many people as you can one-on-one and just talking to them and saying, hey, this is the role now. This is what I'm trying to do. How can I help you? And just take notes and give them a few questions to think about before you have those meetings. And like, again, sit down with as many people as you can in the organization and just talk to them. I think that's the biggest thing.
Awesome. I'm getting a lot of nods there. So we'll move to the next one here. Okay, this is interesting. This came up in the chat too. What are your thoughts on professional certifications? Are they necessary, effective, or helpful if you are in a leadership role in people ops? And I think y'all are all coming from a startup background, so you can just approach it that way. I think things can work a little bit different for larger companies.
I don't think that there's a right answer to this. I think it all depends on like the individual and like how you learn. I mean, I don't have a qualification. I'm hoping I'm okay at my job. But yeah, I think, and then like Katie, who's in my people team, she has a CIPD, like I can't remember the level, but I think it's one of the top levels. And she's also amazing, right? And we have different views on things, and that's why we work really well together. So I think it really depends on you, what you're trying to get out of it. I think I wouldn't just do a qualification to get the certificate, because I don't think that really means much. But I think if you like read through the like what was behind that course, why you like if there's specific things that you're wanting to learn that you don't already know, then I think it's a great opportunity, as any kind of educational opportunity is, to kind of learn something. But only if you feel like what's in the course is really, really helpful. I think in terms of just having a certificate, I don't look at it when I hire in my team.
Same here. I think it's important for you to understand whether you're trying to get into an industry and a specific company where you know it's a requirement, and then you obviously should get it if that's the only thing that gets you there. But also definitely agree with Ashleigh, look into what you're getting out of it. Like if it's just for the sake of having a certificate, I don't think it has value. I also don't have any certifications at the moment. I did at a time looked into getting one, but never actually had the time to get through with it, even though I had all the learning materials and I actually started it. But at the same time, my experience has been that in startup world, things move so much faster than what the certificate would have been able to provide to me, because so much of the certificate's focus was on legal background and laws and some very, basic, and maybe at times I could say old school kind of approaches that it's good to know because it's basics. But I felt that at the time I was also able to get that through my experience and through talking to other people ops leaders.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's just, I also don't have any certifications. I don't put a lot of bearing on them. I've never looked, and it's never a requirement on any of our job postings. I think like it's more about learning. Like, how are you going to learn? Where are you going to learn? How are you going to expand your network and your knowledge? I think that's the most important thing that you should be focusing on.
Awesome. Some great advice there. Okay, we've got 2 more questions. I think we can get through it. From Anna, what are some questions you ask yourself and others at your company, or resources you've found useful to better develop your business acumen to become a stronger people leader?
I'm not sure if I'm the best to answer this question because I started in a business role and then moved to a people role. So I kind of learned my business acumen prior to my role now. So maybe I'll let the others answer.
I think a lot of this is talking to business leaders and understanding what they're focused on and what they need and what they need to know, and knowing that you're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way. I think that's the biggest thing, is like, be prepared to fall on your face a lot, and that's okay as long as you're learning from those mistakes. And joining groups like this, other HR groups, and just learning from those people, and then talking to your CEO, your COO, your head of sales, all those people, and just think and learn how they think about business, I think is really important as well, and how they want to drive the company forward, because that'll also help you talk to those people and how they want to be talked to.
And also talking to really anyone around the company and understand what their challenges are, and then over time learning how they've overcome those challenges, because that is what business is about, right? Like, you keep running into different issues or different tasks to be solved. And so it's not, I don't think it comes down to one specific question, rather than the experience and time and understanding the different circumstances on different teams and how those specific situations got resolved over time.
Awesome. And very last question. We have, for a company looking to raise a Series B round, how does the HR function support this? What questions should I be asking, and how can I support? I'm not sure. Trying to think if any of you specifically have been through that instance. I'll answer very quickly anecdotally about what I hear kind of at that stage, which is that a lot of things turn towards like fully scaling. And I think this happens across departments, of going from, everybody taking on everything to, okay, I've been doing these 5 things. Now I'm going to go out and we're going to hire people to specialize in this and build it out, and really thinking about scaling the team, which obviously in the people side of things comes with a lot of increased headcount and the challenges there. But also just thinking about, how can I take what I was doing before and make it work at this next level? But anybody have any other things they want to jump in with?
Yeah. I think Linda's company's Series B right now, and mine's about to go through Series B. So I can kind of just give you an anecdote about like what my role involves now and how I'm supporting the business. But I think there's kind of like 3 main areas that the people team, that my team is supporting on the business right now as we prepare for our Series B. And that's one, making sure that as we continue to scale, that we can continue to attract the best talent. So, what are we going to do around like an attraction strategy? And actually, Noah, Linda and I were talking about this before. Obviously, everyone joined the call was that's particularly tough at the moment. So thinking creatively around how you make sure that your business stays competitive, especially when you're early on. The next thing that we're looking at is around like, how can we like de-risk the business? Like, I think often when you go through like a really big growth phase, you're at risk of kind of losing some key people, or like starting to potentially like lose some of the efficiency in how you operate, because all of a sudden you like double your headcount, you change ways of working, you enter new regions, and all of a sudden what was working is no longer working. So how can you start thinking around like identifying what those risks are that could happen, and start thinking about how you build the processes and support structures in anticipation for that, or at least be prepared for those. And then I think the last one, which is really important, is that you need to make sure that whatever was unique and amazing about your business before Series B can scale with you as well. So I think that that culture piece is really important as you kind of get bigger. I think what I've personally found is that people who join businesses like seed and Series A, sometimes when it gets a bit bigger, they're like, oh, is this still the business for me? Or is it all of a sudden a different business, and the way that we work is different? So thinking about how your culture is going to change, but how can you do it in a meaningful way that people feel like they've been brought on the journey, and how does that scale? So there are a couple of things that I'm working on at the moment, as well as the kind of more tactical things around like, okay, who are we going to hire? What is the hiring plan? What's the hiring budget? All those kind of more kind of strategic stuff. But yeah, I think those are the kind of key areas.
Everything
go ahead.
what Ashleigh said, and also very specifically for the fundraising process and due diligence, cut down on as much admin work as you can, automate as much as you can, and be very organized. That's the most helpful thing you can do for due diligence, because there's a ton of data you usually need to hand over. And if your leaders see that you're organized, that's going to make the entire process so much easier.
Absolutely. No, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I would also just say is that, like, as you scale, realize that like some of the heads of your departments aren't going to be the right fit to scale that company to the next level, and that's okay. So like your head of sales preseason Series B may not be your head of sales postseason Series B, and that's okay. And having those open, honest conversations with these people and talking to them, be like, are you confident that you can scale the sales team another 40 people, another 50 people, and take us into these new regions that you have no experience in? And if they're like, no, I can't do that, it's like, okay, maybe we hire somebody above them and they become head of sales for the North American region or something like that. But having those open, honest, and transparent conversations, I think, is also very important.
Awesome. Some great tips there. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I know we had a few people jump off that have some things, meetings coming up, but really appreciate all three of you joining us today, and everybody who tuned in. This is recorded, and we'll be sending out a version of that in a few days. It'll be on YouTube. In the meantime, if you want to check out our community, our newsletter, or the platform that we have for people operations leaders on scaling teams, check us out at teamgather.co, and we hope to see you around in the community. Thanks so much, y'all, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.